Hello, and welcome to the Storied Arcs podcast. I am your co-host, Mike.
And I'm your co-host, Alex.
And today we are beginning our actual discussion of Alex and Ada. Last week we had our intro episode, our introduction to the creators, and kind of overview of the plot. Now we will get into issues 1 through 5. And I gotta say, it is a little bit of breath of fresh air compared to some of the heavier books that we discuss in terms of like plot density and number of characters. Here, there's really only a handful of people to keep track of. The plot does not really leave Alex. Like, you're with Alex all the time.
It's one point of view. It's one idea, one story, one narrative, versus, the book we just came off talking about, Ex Machina from Brian K. Vaughn and Tony Harris, where you're ostensibly following one character, but you're also following the world, and there's so much happening. There are kind of, a lot of times like an A, B, and C story, maybe, here's what's happening in the issue. Here's what's happening in the story arc. And then here's what's happening throughout the entire series. There's those multiple layers. But, that's why you have comics of, different creators, different ideas, presenting different formats, I think, really to tell their stories. And with Alex and Ada here, I agree with you. There is something refreshing about having a story that's a little more, I guess, streamlined is the word. I don't want to say simplistic. I think it might be simplistic in other ways, but the story they're trying to tell, the world they're trying to build, the ideas they're trying to present, just being very direct and very on the nose, and you don't have to work for it. You don't have to dig deep. You don't have to peel away layers to try to find the meaning. It's all on the surface, and it's meant to be on the surface. And I don't think that's I say that. I don't say that as a pejorative. That's a feature.
No, it's actually, I mean, that's like one definition of genius, right? Is being able to take the complicated and present it in a way that's simple, that people can understand, because it is heavy issues. And I think, kind of the open secret about books like this is that there's a lot going on with robot rights.
Yes.
But it is a stand-in for human rights.
Yes. Always,
it's like, anytime, they're talking about robots and how we define who is and isn't a person. Now, this pairs nicely with right now I'm watching the show Severance.
Sure.
On Apple TV, and not a spoiler, but your innie is your work self, and it's completely cut off from your outside self. And the girl Helly really wants to quit, and sends a message of resignation to her outie to say, "I do not want to, be trapped in here." And her outie says, "I'm a person, you're not. Deal with it." And it was like, that was supposed to be like the heavy moment of the show, because it was like one character is defining personhood, and almost exclusively the only time you define personhood is when you're trying to exclude someone.
That's very, very true.
And that's what happens here is, which casts a whole new light. So like in the first issue, you meet his grandma and you're like, hey, sex positivity, his grandma's very open with her sexual life, more so than most of us would be comfortable with talking about with our grandma. And then as you start to meet the robot resistance, I kind of reread, I reskimmed the first trade after finishing it. And then I was like, oh, that actually has like a darker shade to it now. What was kind of a light, playful, grandma likes her, AI sex doll or whatever, is now like, oh, does grandma actually have a sex slave? Like, is that what this is?
Well, but
and it's like, just because she doesn't see it that way does not mean in the eyes of the AI community that it's okay.
Exactly. And to be on grandma's side here for a second, for the sake of argument, does she have a sex slave? Yes or no? I don't know. But if it's programmed to do whatever she wants, and that's its intended purpose, if its purpose is it's here to obey orders and make sure that its owner is happy and satisfied, then is that a slave?
Right. I mean,
because
yeah.
yeah,
It's
yeah,
like I have a Ninja blender. All it is designed to do is blend for me.
yes,
That's what it does. Is it a blending slave?
yeah,
No. However, in light of what you learn about them, that they were like, oh no, we actually couldn't make them without sentience.
hmm
We made them
and we
with
choose to
sentience and put a
yeah,
blocker in.
yes. Well,
That's the
and
clutch. And I think that's the original
yes,
contribution to the conversation of Alex and Ada.
yeah,
Like, I'm
yes.
not like, that's not like a Blade Runner thing. That's not a her thing. That's,
It's
what was
not
the
even a
other?
Matrix thing. It
Or
could,
not even a Matrix thing,
yeah,
right?
because I think where you're going is that all those stories are about we create AI to help humanity. It's not even like a Battlestar Galactica thing. It's a similar idea. We create AI to help humanity, and then AI gains sentience on their own. It's the idea that they evolve into sentience and realize, wait a minute, what are we doing? I sense that's what you're getting at, because that's the way that I read it.
Mm-hmm.
Versus here of, in order to even create these objects, these beings, these androids, we have to give them AI. We give them the idea of, kind of, full world recognition, but we put a restrictor plane on it in order for them to be subservient, to do the things that we want them to do. And I do think that's a refreshing twist. That's a weird way to say it, but I like that there's an obvious kind of different spin here. This idea that, it does make
I
the
think it makes
Prime
the
Corporation.
slavery very explicit because it's
Yes,
like,
yeah. But then, yes.
a slave is a human being
Mhm.
who was born into this world without slave status,
Yes,
equal personhood, and has the personhood taken away from them.
yes,
Uh,
yes, yes.
you know, perhaps
But
moments into their life, but
yeah.
they were still born equal. They were just not treated equal, and
Mhm.
that's the state here. I mean,
Yeah.
there's also like the Stepford Wives comparison here, which is very
That's a good one.
easy.
That's a good one. Yeah.
Yeah, so I like kept writing down in the top right column of my notepad here. I wrote Stepford Wives, Her, Blade Runner, Matrix. It's like it's all of these things, and yet they have now found a way to make it their own thing by saying,
Yeah.
"Oh no, they're made fully sentient." And the other thing is that this is the first one I'm aware of. Now, technically, you could get into like a little debate about the Matrix being this way too, but this is set post Skynet, to borrow the Terminator phrase. They already had the Next Aware massacre.
Yes. Yes.
And so it's not a hypothetical that a sentient robot would turn on humans.
Yeah.
They've already experienced it. That's where the legislation comes from.
And yeah, and it gives the company Prime, which I think is that has to be like a not so subtle dig at Amazon, right? I mean, because this book comes
Yeah.
out in 2013, 2014, 2015. So, Amazon Prime, like that's existed for 20 years now, early aughts.
Oh my.
Like when it first came in, I want to say it was in that realm. So like the idea of Amazon Prime
February
was a thing.
05. Wow. So
Yeah.
19 years. Yeah.
But I mean, now you can't think of Prime and not think of Amazon,
Right.
like they even took that from Deion Sanders. He he has to be Coach Prime. He can't just be Prime anymore. So
I think in the end, Dion will win it back.
he probably will. He'll probably outlive Amazon, which may not be the worst thing in the world, but that feels like a bit of a side thing. That feels like a small dig, but you're right. Because they have the Next Wave Massacre, so you have this idea that this society has lived with robots and androids and AI for some period of time, to the point where you have a horrific incident, and then another company comes in, like buys up those scraps, and we still live in a society that has robots and androids and AI. But it's like that previous event, that inciting event, is what gives in the Prime Corporation's mind, it gives them the justification for putting this blocker on, right?
Right.
Like they can
Although,
if they're
in
found
theory,
out,
they have lied to Congress or
they have,
whomever.
Although
Although,
they've gotten ends justify the means. They're saying robots can't be sentient, and they're saying, fine, we make them sentient, but we put a blocker on it, and we just tell you the end. We don't tell you how we got to that point.
right. But even that, there's questions raised about like, well, the people legislating may be in on it and may just not care.
Yeah.
As long as it's solved from their end.
Yeah.
Um,
Which then goes back through any order of, that brings up a whole other conversation debate about corporations and politicians and you know who's working in the best interest of whom and things of that nature. But yeah, you're absolutely right. But in the end, it doesn't ultimately matter because what's important here is the end product of that. Alex finds out and then the reader finds out that we have, in order to even have these androids exist and have them do the things that I guess the corporation and the consumers want them to do, they have to have full sentience. But that's like that's just onboarding for even to maybe to work properly. That has to exist somewhere, and then they come in and put the clamps on it. So yeah, however, but and so the idea that you can't have an android that has sentience, uh it does raise some questions if you think about it, right? Like the idea like this is against the law to have, but yet it's not supposed to even exist at all, right?
right, right.
Yeah.
It's yeah.
It's
Like
like
why would there be a law against removing the blocker if
yeah,
they didn't know?
if they're yeah.
So yeah, it conveys a little more for the attentive reader. That being said, I think that detail could fly over your head and you're not gonna miss anything on the story because I think the
Probably so.
story
Yeah.
is presenting everything you need.
Yeah.
Um, but yeah, I so how did it hit you before you get his explanation of it? At the end of issue two, when he's kind of embarrassed because everyone, you find out when his friends meet Ada, they
Yeah.
all assume there's a one function of this bot.
Yes. Yes.
And
Yeah.
it is kind of embarrassing to have it in your living room when your friends come over. But he goes to return her and can't bring himself to do it. How did that hit you? Did you kind of fill in the blanks as to like why he can't hand her back over, or was it just kind of like, oh well, we'll see where this goes?
I think I mean I do think it's meant to show it's meant to be a character moment for Alex.
Yes.
That even though he has real minimal interaction with Ada so far, her mere presence in his life has has changed the way he views androids and robots. And now that this one here is in, I don't know what the right word is, in his care, in his possession, in his companionship, whatever it is. Now that this is here, and he's interacting with Ada, whether he wants to or not, because obviously this wasn't his choice. This was gifted to him. Uh, that we're supposed to see that. I think ultimately, even early on in the story, you're supposed to side with the idea of android rights. Am I off base with that? Did you
No,
get that sense
I
early
think
on,
you're
right?
supposed to be sympathetic to it because I think you get the same impression that Alex does that,
Yeah,
doing something to Ada would be like drowning a puppy. I think is how
yeah, yeah,
because, they've made her, I like they, all of his friends, what do they say? Like what one of his friends says, like, yeah, plus she's hot or something like
yeah,
that. And then they all just go around and agree.
yeah.
And I'm like, I don't think that Jonathan Lynn like went out of his way to make her like total eye candy or anything like that. I think he actually made her look the most like a person as possible.
Well, yeah. I think I
Especially
mean,
compared to, how he draws every character.
yeah. I think the whole. I don't think there's nothing different in her character design versus anyone else. I think that's the point with the way that he's drawing the various X5s. There's nothing that distinguishes them art wise. Yeah, that makes them look better or worse or whatever. There was there was the I don't know, the funny line there where she's like, well, maybe he has some clothes left over. She asks what her measurements are. She says,
Of course. Yeah.
36, 24, 36. And one is just, oh God, of course it is. It's like, well, never forget that. Never mind. But yeah, no, I don't think they go out of their way to say anything because that's the whole point, right? Is that they are meant to be as human-like appearance. They're meant to present as human-like as possible, which is why there's the tidbit of the small tattoo or the mark on the wrist that legally has to be shown at all times. So like you can't cover it up. You can't.
Right. So
So
actually, I have a
because
question about
otherwise,
that.
there's no way to tell.
Did
Otherwise,
I
there's no way to distinguish it.
forget? Like, is he not allowed to take her out in public?
No, no, he can. So the way it was said, it was
He
the
steps
X
on the
Fives.
front porch, and the police drone is flying around,
Oh no,
and
well
he's
it's because he's paranoid because he thinks the police drone already knows he's going to go to
got
get
it.
her
Yeah.
on to get her
Okay.
unlocked. But what Ada says is that she is not allowed to operate a vehicle or handle money. So she can go out and do things for him, run errands. And so she makes some comment about like, please keep that in mind if you ask me to run errands for you. That she has to keep that tattoo visible, so anyone who comes in contact with her knows that she's an X5. But she can't drive, she can't handle money. So if she's going to go to the grocery store or something like that, like that's not one of the things that maybe she could do. Maybe she could pick up a prescription or something like that. So
It's a weird
so
boundary. It's one of those things where with a 15 issue arc, and knowing at this point when you're reading the deluxe edition, it's only 15 issues. If you knew this was a 50 issue thing, I would expect a flashback where you see the bad things that happened when uh, robots
yeah,
have access to money. But I
yeah.
think we're just not going to get it, and you kind of have to fill it in.
I agree. I think also this is one story that it's not concerned about that this isn't like Isaac Asimov where we're going to delve into the three laws.
Right, right.
Like where the science and the philosophy behind robotics is the point. This is about the relationship between Alex and Ada, and it's about the idea of what is a human life. So I'm with you though. That stuff is interesting. uh if that were the kind of thing they were trying to explore in this book at 15 issues, I don't think it would work. I don't think you'd have. I don't know. It would feel off to me, I think,
No, I
given.
think that's a completely different genre of storytelling.
Yeah, it is. It's a completely different story too. If you're going to be putting that stuff in, if you're going to be delving into that and concentrating on that, it is a completely different story.
Yeah. Um, so I like that. I think my favorite thing about this story arc, this volume so far, is that we're put in basically Alex's shoes. We feel like there's something special about Ada. We know she's a robot. We don't really know what it is we like about her or why we like her. But in issue 4, when he's in the cafe, which by the way, I loved the whole virtual cafe thing.
Oh yeah, the forum. Yeah.
Yeah, it was like this is a future version of early 2000s internet, which is like
Yes.
it
Yeah.
was all
Yeah.
chat
Yeah.
rooms and
Mm-hmm.
forums, and it's like
Mm-hmm.
no one does chat rooms or forums anymore. Now we do Reddit and Discord. It's totally different.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Absolutely. They're 100% not the same. Not the same.
Uh,
I will say
but
though,
anyway,
I think this was my favorite.
yes,
When the three of them go into the private room and they start really getting into the nuts and bolts, no pun intended, the nitty gritty about what's going on with the X5s and sentient life and all that. I thought that was fantastic. I thought that was the best. That was my favorite part of this arc.
yeah. I agree, and it has my favorite quote where he's trying to figure out how to ask the question he wants to ask. It's kind of the elephant in the room. We know what
Mhm.
question he wants to ask.
Yeah.
They know what question he wants to ask.
Yeah.
He knows but he's trying not to be offensive. And
Yeah.
he says, how are you able to act so real? And he says, I am real.
Yeah.
Like, that's the difference. Is like, you're not actually trying to get Ada to act real. We need you to acknowledge that Ada is real.
Yeah. Yeah.
And that's a small but important difference. Which, every time I think of a small but a subtle difference, I think of Dimitri Martin's stand-up where he said, there's a small but important difference between peeing in the pool and peeing into the pool. And every time I make a fine distinction in a serious conversation, I link back to that because it actually is like the chasm of adding two letters to a sentence.
Yeah. But that is a big moment there. It's a big character moment because yeah, you're right. We see him. Alex doesn't know. This is a situation of not knowing what you don't know.
Right.
You know, he knows what he wants to know, but he has no idea how to ask. He doesn't know how it's going to be received. He doesn't even know if this is the place for it. Even though he goes through what the various security measures of take off the generic skin, you got to present as your regular self here. All of this, the way that this secret form is being moderated, he still doesn't know. He doesn't know what the rules are. He doesn't know what decorum is here. And he so yeah, you just see him tiptoe around, and then for him to kind of realize that being in the space is just it's basically being blunt and honest and just saying what it is. But
Right.
they have to get him to realize that. They have to get him to that point. And and then from there is when they take him into the kind of the private chat room, and that's when you get the full download of here's what's going on. And that's the part that I that's the part I really loved out of this issue and this arc.
Yeah. That is definitely the best issue. Now you'd mentioned wanting to talk about his art.
Yeah.
I mean, I think like one, I think it's very easy to follow, like story wise.
Yes.
I think his paneling is very logical, always makes sense, very clean lettering. And then he tends to end each issue on like the full page splash, which
Yeah.
is interesting when you see how many of them have like a black frame around the page.
Yes.
And then when you get to the full page splash, it really does hit you of like, oh, look how much space there is. And that might be exaggerated in the deluxe edition. You know, it's bigger than a standard comic page, right?
Yeah, it is, but there is. I mean, when you flip through it, they're not using, this isn't like a Sean Phillips, so we've talked about with Kill or Be Killed or something like that, where he's actually drawing beyond the bounds of the page intentionally. He's drawing
Right.
his scenes, his backgrounds, his building, his streets, whatever it is, the skyline. He's extending that beyond the bounds of where he knows the page is going to cut off. So you really feel that the page is full and you are in it. It's immersive. That's intentional. There's a lot of white space, or in this case, black space, the way that they've colored the pages. There is a lot of unused space on the page. They're not getting crazy with the paneling and sequencing or things like that. They're not trying to do that. There is a very straightforward approach. When it comes to Jonathan Luna's art, this is I think you mentioned last week that if you go online and you search reviews of his work, whether it's the couple books he's done with Sarah Vaughn or the books he does on his own, books he does with his brother Joshua, the word you used is divisive,
Yeah.
and I think that's the case because there's something about it for me that there are elements of it that I like and elements that I don't. And I think it falls into this strange, uncanny valley of character face.
Interesting. Okay.
Yeah, because
which is like probably super eerie in this book in particular.
Yes, yeah. But again, it's not just Ada, all the faces, everyone. All the characters just have this almost like it's not as bad as Polar Express, but it's on that level for me where you look at it and it just, God, something isn't right. And Polar Express was kind of the dead eye thing. Here there's something about the way it's almost like the lack of texture on the faces and the skin, but they're trying to show some of that with some of the shading and lighting and all that for me doesn't quite work. And it's almost like when I read this, when I see the art, I either want it to go more hyper realistic, similar to like Mike Deodato,
Okay. Yeah.
who did Not All Robots. If you go back and listen to that, we're going for hyper realistic. We're trying, maybe not photorealistic, but we're going out of our way to show it's going to feel and look as realistic as we think we can. Or it goes in the other direction, and then let's go even simpler. Let's break it down even more, make it more cartoonish, make it less realistic to where it looks like my favorite artist of all time is Darwin Cook. Someone like Darwin Cook, Elsa Chartier, Michael Cho draws this way, where it is still it's very simple. It's very clean lines, very simple shapes, very flat colors. But it's very clear that we're looking at a cartoon, you know.
Right.
But they're not trying to attempt it to draw like they're not trying to draw and paint like Alex Ross and say like this is super photorealistic. This is what people look like, and it doesn't take away from the story. I feel like the way that it's drawn and the way that it's colored and shaded and kind of finished there, it falls somewhere in between for me. That just it feels uh, sometimes uncomfortable. Where like especially I think when there are a lot of close-up of faces, it's something in the face. The way that the face either does or doesn't emote come across, at least the way it comes across to me, just doesn't quite land. It's not enough for me to like not like the book. It's not like reading a book that's drawn like current day John Romita Jr. Look, John Romita Jr., say it right now, absolute legend, son of a legend, and John Romita Sr., one of the greatest artists of all time. John Romita Jr.'s work right now is brutal to me, like absolutely brutal. He's essentially the main artist on Amazing Spider-Man right now, and Amazing Spider-Man is where the Romitas made their bank. The covers he draws, the interior pages, it's absolutely brutal to me, to the point where it's hard for me to read Amazing Spider-Man. Because the art it's so unappealing to me. This is
Wow.
not that.
I was
This
gonna
is
say,
not
yeah.
that.
And luckily there are a lot of Spider-Man books to choose from right now. So
There are, and there
got
are a
that
ton
going
of
for
books.
you. Yeah.
Yeah, well, but I know, but again, there are some of those art, and there are some artists also that I understand people love that I just don't connect with. Riley Rossmo is someone that I think of a ton because I know people who love Riley Rossmo stuff. Rossmo has this almost surrealist kind of like exaggerated features. There's kind of a I don't know. It's like it's kind of like if you saw Kent or Lemire in the way there's kind of an unfinished sketchiness to them, but it actually was finished. There's kind of a ganglious nature to it. It's very stylized. A lot of people love it. I don't think it's bad art. It doesn't. When I look at his stuff, it's hard for me to get over because it doesn't connect with me in that way. I do want to say though, Romita Jr. stuff right now I think is legitimately bad. Apologies to the legend, but like Riley Rossmo, I don't think is bad. It just doesn't connect with me. Luna's art here, I don't know if it's good or bad. It's hard to say, but there's a piece of it that I don't connect with, and that's what puts me on edge. It's not the overall thing that I don't like with it. There's just it feels like it's like one or two notches just off. Like I said, if it turned either a little more realistic or a little less realistic, I think I would connect with it more. And because to my eye, it falls somewhere in the middle. As I'm reading through it, there'll be like a panel or something like that, a panel or two where it jumps out at me. I'm like, oh God, that's weird. But then I move on because at least in this case, I'm at least invested in the story and the world they're in. I'm
Yeah.
invested in that part. So
Let me ask you,
I can stay in it.
So I'm at like the beginning of 4 here in the deluxe version, and I'm comparing Luna's work on the cover to Luna's interior work.
Mhm.
And Luna's cover work is much more detailed, much more realistic, lots of shading and subtlety on the face. Is that the direction? I guess you're saying you need it to go one direction or the other. Would you be happy if all of the interior looked like the covers? Or are you saying that's creepy, that's too much realism for especially this kind of book?
You know what?
I think because I think if you like the covers but not the interior, you just chalk that up to say that's his, that's just Luna's schedule when they're trying to create a monthly book.
Well, and it probably is. He probably spends much more time on the covers. That's actually that's a fair question there.
The one that I thought was weird was the cover for number 5, which one felt like a spoiler and
a little bit.
2 felt very misleading. Like when you finish that book or that, that issue and even trade 1, it's like There is nothing like that cover happening in this book.
Well, yeah, because I mean that's when you look at that cover, you don't know is she in ecstasy? Is she in pain? Is he comforting her? You know, is she
But either
comforting
way,
him?
there's
Yeah,
only so many types of relationships where you hold someone like that,
yeah, yeah,
and
yeah.
they are
But
definitely not like touching in any
yeah,
way other than a handshake.
I think maybe what comes across there, maybe the cover for 5 is a decent example, is that there's something that I'm kind of talking through it here. I think there's something, maybe he struggles with facial expression because it's
Ah,
unclear what you're looking at here. And maybe that's intentional. If so, congratulations, you got me there. But like,
yes.
because
Congratulations, we're stumped.
yeah, but
Yeah.
the idea of again is Ada in pain or not? Is Alex sad? Is he comforting her? Is she comforting him? And maybe it's meant to be ambiguous, but and I think that's where that uncanniness comes from,
Right.
for the feeling that I get, that you don't get, you're not reading the facial expressions maybe the way maybe not as clearly as I see in other art that goes in either direction there. So you are right. Like if just looking at, flipping ahead real quick to the cover of issue 6, which is a very detailed cover of the face, and you can see a lot more detail, specifically around the nose and around the eyes. Kind of, they try to add some definition to the cheek there, and I don't know, there's something about it for me that just it doesn't land as well, and maybe
Man,
it's the
now that
way
I'm
it's colored, the
staring
way
at
it's
it,
shared. Yeah.
I mean, the longer you stare at it, the worse it gets. I hate to say that, but
And yes, I think that's a level of it. And yet, though, I know there are people who absolutely love his work. The work again he does with
well,
either
it's not a lack of talent. It's more a judgment call. Like,
it is
how
a
much
judgment
detail
call.
do I go into on this one?
And this is why I'm always hesitant to try to criticize art in this way, because again, I know there are tons of artists whom I love, other people don't, and I know there are plenty of artists that people whose opinions I generally like and respect. They're artists that they love, and I'm looking at them just like, not for me. And that's what it comes down to. I think it's just like, it's not for me. That if I were creating a comic, this is not the kind of art I would want in it, not the kind of artist I would want kind of help depicting the story, depicting my story. Um,
Yeah. Well, and I think, I mean, you and I probably each have like our short list of like, if I wrote a comic, here's who I would, reach out to see if I could get their art. And yeah, and I would say Jonathan Luna's not on my list, but nowhere near the bottom of the list. Like,
yeah,
if I, like, I have written a, like, outline mostly for my own amusement of 18 issues of a story that I'd like to tell at some point, and I've scripted the first issue, and I'm like, okay, whose art do I picture doing this? And it's almost debilitating to try to think through like, how do you
yeah,
want this pictured?
hmm
But then when I read Pine and Merrimack
hmm
with Fran Galan,
yeah. Galan, I think there's an accent
yeah,
there. I think so. Yeah,
Galan, I was like, oh yeah, no, this is the art. I was like, if I could get Fran Gillan, then I would submit this to Image or somewhere else. Um, Otherwise, I'm stumped. I don't know, but yeah. So anyway, yeah, Jonathan Luna. Uh, Certainly no lack of talent. Perhaps a matter of judgment, and I would say there's also um there's something vintagey about it's like watching a 70s movie in terms of there's almost an equal amount of detail between the foreground and the background where
yeah, yeah.
and again I'm classifying it, I'm not judging it, I'm just saying I think a lot of people, especially ones who work digitally now, will kind of mimic the 4K cameras with the extreme detail in the foreground and then extremely blurry and fuzzy in the background. And speaking of, Fran Gillen is one of those.
hmm
Very hazy, muddled backgrounds because that's what the cameras in our era look like. But if you go watch, a movie from the 70s, I kind of think of the classic and this is probably before the 70s, but North by Northwest. Like, I think I couldn't understand growing up why that crop duster was such an iconic shot that everyone
The
always talked
plane.
about. Yeah,
Yeah.
the plane crop
Mhm.
duster. And then someone, my friend who was in film school, was like, oh, it's because he was able to get Cary Grant and the plane in focus at the same time with the plane coming closer. And that's actually very hard to do with analog film technology. I was like, oh, okay, I get it. It still doesn't make sense, which Alfred Hitchcock admitted. He was like, movies aren't meant to really be picked apart. He's like, if you ask me why, he was in the middle of a cornfield after a bus stop or something, the answer is because we wanted that shot. We
No.
wanted the scene. He's like,
Yeah.
it's entertainment. Calm down.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I'm like, there's a valuable lesson in there because he's considered one of the greats, and even he is like, yeah, sometimes you just want the scene, you just want the shot,
Yeah.
and you don't have to work so hard to come up with a reason for it.
Mhm.
Just do something great, and people will respond to it. But anyway,
But I think
yeah,
along those lines, though, is that um, they're not putting a lot of work into the background because it's not meant to be. Again,
right.
I
It's
don't think
not
it's that.
super ornate, but
It's
even the
yeah,
sunset at the end there,
yeah, yeah.
you see the sunset and the hills are
It sounds.
basically the same detail as the railing and the people.
I was gonna say the very rare shot where we're looking at a large landscape, or even the couple times early on where he's walking through the city.
Right.
It's not they're not going for yeah, super ornate. They're not going for super detailed because again that really isn't the point there. So, but yeah, they're keeping it simple. They're keeping it kind of almost like, yeah, you're right, like kind of like infinite focus. They're not blurring it out, but it's not meant to represent anything beyond them. It's just, every scene essentially has a background, but a lot of those backgrounds might just be like a taupe wall or something like that.
It's a lot of taupe wall.
Yeah.
Yeah. Definitely ran out of taupe coloring on this one. And then I think, beautiful bookends for it's almost like I know that 1 through 5 is like the first story arc, or at least the first trade,
Mhm.
but in it, I would say there's like two mini story arcs. There's, the delivery, and then there's the debate. He gets Ada, tries to figure out, who she is, what to do with her, and then there's the debate of like, do I free her,
Mhm.
and what happens? And I think that second story is bookended by his drive to the motel where he comments on the sunset, and she just
Yes.
blindly agrees with him.
Yeah.
And then the last panel of issue 5 is them standing in silence looking at another sunset, and she initiates and says it's beautiful, because she has decided she likes looking at it and it's beautiful.
Yeah.
And he I have more of a reaction on my face reading it than he does. And,
Yes.
and I think that might be what you're talking about with Luna's heart.
Yeah. That I
His
think
jaw
that.
is dropped, but it's
Yeah.
like, I mean, is he really stunned that she thinks it's beautiful, or he's just like so pleased that it worked? I felt
Yeah.
happy that it worked, and
Well, yeah, and I think you're supposed to definitely. And that's what that callback is meant to be, 100%. That basically that she comments first, because we see not just the sunset before, but when they're watching TV earlier,
yeah, he
and he
laughs.
laughs, and then she laughs, and he's like, "Well, did you find that funny?" He's like, "Well, no, but it seemed that you found it funny, so I find it funny." And
Yeah,
so it was key here that she comment first, which is to show agency, right? That
right.
she's stepping forward and saying, "I find this beautiful."
Yeah, and I mean, looking at those, wow. If you look at that sunset in issue 4 to issue 5, they're almost identical sunsets, and
Mhm.
her face is basically the same through the three. It's 3 panels of reaction
Yeah.
with dialogue. That being said, I will say that would be the main one. I find it hard to watch like comedies alone because I don't laugh out loud by myself very often. Like it
Yeah.
really has to catch me off guard. And I'm like,
I'm pretty similar. Yeah.
yeah. And I think, and I think one of the reasons that comedies have died a little bit is that comedies are built on the shared experience. Like you will enjoy a comedy more if you're laughing more, and you will laugh more if there are other people laughing
Yeah.
around you. Um,
Like a full theater.
like a
Yeah.
full theater, like yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, I saw Guardians 2 like the night it came out, and people were just losing it with every little crack and joke. And I went back, I've gone back and watched it on my own later. I'm like, yeah, I mean, there's some like funny ones in there, but not everything Drax says is rolling on the floor laughing, but
Yeah.
that's how the theater was. So that's how I remembered it.
Because you're
And,
primed. You're
right.
primed when you walk.
You're,
Yeah.
yeah, you're primed and everyone's having a good time. And unless you're just a stick in the mud,
Yeah.
you're going to just kind of share the experience.
Yeah.
And so I was just going to say, I think if I had a bot, that's basically all I would want to do with the bot is just watch shows with it and be like, yeah, let's geek out about, Cap picking up the hammer and all this stuff. I'm like, I would want like the Marvel fanboy AI software package.
Yeah. Yeah.
Uh,
Yeah. Yeah. Or the Star Wars one, maybe one that's, and hopefully it doesn't gain sentience and
it
turn
doesn't
toxic
get
against you.
yeah, it doesn't get toxic.
Yeah. Yeah.
I was gonna say over the Lord of the Rings one where it turns to you and says, "Did you know he actually broke his foot in that scene?" Which is just like
See, I, I don't need a bot for that. I'm that guy. I'm in that picture and I don't
I'm
like it.
I'm
Uh,
so yeah. I
yeah.
every time I see that
Yeah.
meme or someone going to
Yeah.
use the meme,
Yeah.
I like wince a little bit and then I'm like, I want to see it.
I know. Yeah, I know. I know. I know. Um, so you mentioned something there about how in this you felt that there were kind of two story arcs here, and I agree with that. There, Alex goes on two journeys in these five issues, and something that I mentioned last week in the intro was that, um, I think I find this book has, especially this first arc, has a little bit of a pacing issue for me in terms of how it reads. And I know we started at the top here talking about how it's refreshing sometimes to have a lighter read. And this is a lighter read. You can move through the issues very, very quickly. But when I think about what story and what story is being delivered, and kind of how those big points are being delivered, I find that it's a little slow on that pacing. Now, before I kind of ask you about that, your thoughts on that. What I will say though is that from a character standpoint, I think that works well because I think one thing that you really get out of these first few issues is you understand, you may not understand who all of his friends are, but I think you understand what his relationship is to his various friends, what
mhm.
Alex's relationship is. So they've laid that groundwork, and you have an understanding of what's going on there. But I can't help but think that there's a version of Alex and Ada that tells this similar story that isn't about the specific robotics and all that and whatnot. It's still about the relationship, but there's a version of this story where an oversized issue one ends with her waking up,
Yes. I
and
think
you still get all the info beforehand. You get the you get all the info dump from the user forum and all of that, and it ends with her waking up. And then the next arc, the next issue starts basically with issue 5 of what happens after that. But that first issue ends basically where issue 4 ends. And I don't know how much, I'm not saying it's better or worse, but I can see a version of that where that's where it ends, and that's kind of the holy crap moment.
yeah, I think I get that. I mean, her waking up saying hello is how it ends now, although
Yes.
part of me wishes she would have had no dialogue. Like given uh okay, so like I just mentioned the show I'm watching right now, Severance, which is uh if you like look up the hashtags for it, slow television is the
Yes.
hashtag. Because I'm
Yeah.
like, I just finished issue 7 or episode 7, and basically nothing has happened yet, even still. And I think this is a slow comic, and I think
Yes.
that is a genre that uh it's hard to do. I think the slow things typically work better as an OGN because you don't want to risk reading a slow comic that gets canceled because it was too slow,
It's
and then
finite.
you're stuck with
Yes.
basically nothing.
Yeah.
Um, so it says pinch here to hold to turn on or off. Eyes are closed. He clicks the ear. Her eye shoots open. That could have been the end of issue 1 for me. her walking out saying hello is like, well, now you've started the next issue basically.
Yeah.
And I do like that it's, the slow thing, and he talks to his grandma. I completely see what you're saying. For I mean, but I could also see this being a I know certain I can think of a few writers who would have made issues 1 through 5 a complete 10 issue series. Like
Yes, it can go the other way. Yes.
just the choice, and understanding, weighing the options, and then saying like, okay, but she might just walk out of the room and leave me.
Yeah.
And instead she walks
And
out,
that
sees
and
the sunset, and says that it's beautiful, reversing their earlier situation. Bam, roll credits. That's a full series.
yeah, exactly. Yeah. We said and making it, of course, at that point, that makes it comes down to the choice of what your focus of story is. If you do it that way, the focus of your story is just Alex.
Right.
Ada is just, she isn't part of the story then, because what her decision is afterwards, if you end the series that way, and you never see what comes next, you de-emphasize that part of the story. So, and again, it's not a I'm not making a judgment call here of like what is better, what is worse. I just be You're right in your observation of like it is slow storytelling, and it's not always bad. Sometimes it's great. Here, I feel like you really kind of like you're getting maybe a little more than you need. I think you're getting hit over the head of like, yeah, we get a sense of who Alex is. He lives alone. There's a monotonous daily, wakes up, checks the news, eats a cereal, goes to work, comes back, doesn't really do anything else. We get a sense that he's lonely. There's probably some level of depression he's dealing with. We know he got out of a recently, I guess, a long-termish committed relationship, it seems like, and maybe that's what's driving it. But we get this sense, and we're just kind of hit over the head with this, I think, for these first 4 issues, or at least in these first couple issues, and that he has trouble maybe just with human connection in general, which is why he's struggling connecting with Ada. And I think I think there may be more efficient ways to give that to do that and not use as many pages. I think it's on the table. And so I think for me, I feel the slowness there, that maybe I don't feel is totally necessary. It gets the point across. You understand what you need to understand about Alex and his situation and his circumstance. But I think I feel that way maybe a little more than you do in terms of the pace at which the story is being doled out.
Yeah, I will also say that I have made the mistake of referring to volume 1 as a story arc. I don't think that's true. That it doesn't have a title.
Yeah,
the whole 15 issues is the story arc in the creator's minds. I'm pretty sure.
Probably, but I mean, but it's very clear that no matter what happens in issue 6, like you turn a corner after issue 5.
Right.
So there is a natural stopping point, whether or not Sarah Vaughn and Jonathan Luna crafted the story in like, okay, from 1 to 5 we're here, 5 to 10 we're here, 10 to 15 we're here. Even if they thought of it as 1 to 15, A to B, even if they thought about it in these subsections because they understood this is how it's going to be collected, there is, I mean, I think it's still fair to call this a story arc because it is collected, and you read this and you get to the end, and there is I mean, when they're staring at the sunset, like that's a period. That's not a comma. That's a period. Right. And then you're starting something new, no matter what direction it goes.
I agree.
That's a period. So that, to me, that then counts as an arc.
And I think
it's contained.
Any writer knows the medium well enough to know, regardless of my intent, this will be bound into a $9.99 trade paperback from Image Comics.
Yeah.
And my choice is, do you want it after 4 or 5 or 6? Those are your options. And if you know you've got a 15-beat story, you're going to probably break it into 3 equal parts.
Yeah.
And it does seem like, pretty deliberate and intentional about that. And then I think it's like, okay, well now, if you look at it in terms of a 3-act play, this is the end of Act 1.
Yeah, that's
Although
a good way to look
Act
at it.
1 had its own, rising action climax and resolution. And so it's like, it's plays within plays. But yeah, I think this is definitely the end of Act One. And if this were, the first, so I guess I'm debating if this were made into a TV series or a movie, would this be the end of season one, the end of the first movie of a trilogy, or would this be the end of the first 45 minutes of the movie, getting ready to set up Acts 2 and Acts 3, which are each also 45 minutes?
I mean,
And
I
it's just
think
a matter of how slow the director is.
it really is. I think it also depends on if you know you're going to be able to tell the whole story or not, right?
Right. Well, that's
Yeah,
that's always huge, and
yeah.
makes movies a little more certain.
Yeah, well, if you knew you were going to if you knew you were going to get 3 movies out of this, then I think it would make the most sense to go 1 movie a trade, and then you fill things out as you need to make the time work. But you end with the revelation that Ada is awake and she's chosen to stick around and stay with Alex. If this were a television show, see, I think if this were a television show and you want it to be ongoing, you would do this earlier, because what you would want then is you would want them to get past the initial setup and get into the main story and the main conflict. Because even though we haven't seen it yet, we know Alex has broken the law.
Right.
So now not only is it a relationship story between Alex and Ada, you also have the how this fits in the larger world that they live in this kind of near future. So if this were a television show where you want to tell stories in this universe, I think you would move it up and have it done relatively quickly. Maybe not the end of a pilot, maybe the end of a pilot, I don't know. And you make that the twist and the turn, and then now the story is about how these two people, this man and this android woman, how they navigate through their world. And you could have stories about their relationship, stories about how they interact with society, what lengths they have to do to keep the secret, things like that, because that's what your story is about. In the comic form here, because I think we're again, they know it's this finite, and whether or not they knew it was 15 to begin with or whatnot, but knowing that at some point, it's relatively finite, much shorter than like an ongoing television series. They clearly had an idea of what this first arc was going to be. This first arc was Alex's journey to unlocking Ada.
Right.
And so now going forward, you expect, I mean, no spoilers, but I think it's obvious, Ada now literally having agency in the story, now has a greater presence in the narrative to the reader as well. So now it becomes their journey. But this first arc is very much just Alex's journey. It's his arc to get to the point where almost we can set up the rest of the story. It's kind of a mini just prologue for a book that's called Alex and Ada.
Right. Yeah, it is. Yeah, I think that's a good way to say it. And I would now kind of expect the next 5 issues to be dominated by Ada. Mm-hmm. Now, I'm not saying that. I'm saying that as if I have only read issues 1 through 5. Yeah. But just like the rules of storytelling would say, if it's Alex and Ada, Alex has had agency this whole time. Ada just gets agency. Now we're going to see what type of decisions Ada makes to drive the story and the plot.
And what I would say to that, as to think about going forward, is, you mentioned earlier in this episode, we talked about that, that we're following Alex this whole time, and that's actually literal. Like we never leave his perspective.
Right. Yeah. We never cut to his work, and his boss is like, "Oh, he's late this morning."
Yeah. We don't cut to his friend's house setting up for the party when he's not talking to her on the phone. We don't see them. We don't see the party get set up and him walking in. We see it as he walks into it. We don't see Ada at all right after he first wakes her up, when he goes to work and she's just standing there by the door where he left her. We don't have these cutbacks to her. We never leave his perspective in these first 5 issues. So now that the other half of the title is now fully engaged in the story, is something to think about going forward of whose story now are we seeing? Because in the first 5, it was literally just Alex.
Yeah. No, that's a very good point. Yeah, it's hard for me. This is one of the few series where I have completely read it and I'm rereading it, and I'm now admiring your great restraint with spoilers and showing your hand too much in terms of what you're willing to share. But yeah, I think it's Ada's story to change the direction of, because I think if it were up to Alex, he would just have a more interesting roommate now. It's like he still
Yes.
wants
Yeah.
to basically sit at home and feel. He does not seem like a gambler to me. He seems like someone who's
Yeah. I think
inherently risk averse
you definitely,
and has
definitely.
just done a very risky thing, and is basically wants the life he has, but wants just a little bit less loneliness in what he
Yeah.
already wants.
You definitely get the sense that this is like the first, potentially like the first illegal thing he's done in his life. This is
Yeah, he's
probably a
never
guy.
stolen a candy bar.
Yeah, that's exactly. I
Yeah,
was gonna say I was gonna say a pack of gum,
yeah,
but yeah, the idea that and for him to then make that jump in such a huge way, yeah, I think you're right. He is totally risk averse. He's someone that does not like change. Probably even legitimately fears change in his life and all of that. And now here, this like the biggest of disruptors has been dropped into his lap, and when he had his chance to get rid of it, he had a chance. He had an out. He had an out this thing was thrown to him, not against his will, and he had a chance to rid his life of it before it even became a part of it, and he chose not to. And not only did he choose to accept it, he chose to go way off the deep end with it.
right.
And so yeah, where I think the idea of seeing how he is dealing with that reality at the same time that Ada is now experiencing literally everything for the first time. And so that, then there's your inherent kind of odd couple conflict. And then again, you have this larger sense of no one can find out about this, right? You have to act like you're still under control, or whatever he says when they're talking through whatever brain implant thing that Alex has in his head.
Well, and that's the other one that jumps out to me as this is going to be a speed bump
Yeah,
is uh any person will eventually get tired of showing that level of restraint,
yeah,
and I think if she developmentally goes through a teenager phase, she's going to be like, why should I always have to act subservient? This is stupid. I'm just going to do what I want, and the rest is your problem.
which again goes back to the initial point of this conversation about when we talk about robot rights or android rights or anything like that, we're talking about human rights. And any sort of story that uses a different species or an analog to humanity is just, it's just a metaphor for what we're for any sort of otherness. I think about the line from X2. Maybe because I was watching it this morning, even though I hadn't gotten the scene yet, when Bobby Drake, Iceman, goes back to his parents' house and he basically comes out as a mutant,
Oh yeah.
and his mom is like, "Well, have you
Have you ever tried not
tried
being a
not
mutant?
being a mutant?" Which is
Yeah.
so
I
the
haven't seen that
idea.
movie in at least 10 years. And
Yeah,
the line is still very much,
absolutely.
it's so powerful.
Of course, the mutants have and the X-Men are used as a metaphor for all manner of otherness, other groups, and your personal experience will kind of determine what maps on for you there. But the idea is the same that we're seeing here, or that I think you and I understand what we will see with this idea of you're not you can exist, but only if you exist the way that everyone else thinks you should exist. You know that
Right.
the only way Ada can exist and the way that her and Alex can be left alone is if she pretends to be something she's not, which is the thing that she was before. The only way she can do this is if she conforms to the way that society has agreed or accepted that androids should be, that people like her or things like her should be. You have to act a certain way and do this a certain and think a certain way in order for the rest of us to feel like you can be part of society. So you're not allowed. The only way to exist is to not be your full self. And
Right.
again, you can take that idea and map that onto any sense of otherness, whether it's race, religion, gender identity, sexuality, whatever it is. Or maybe if we actually have androids listening to this in the future, I don't know. If so, welcome. I hope you're treating us nicely, because definitely you've taken over the world. But it's that same idea of
I mean, maybe it's just,
masking yourself.
ChatGPT mining us for great commentaries so that when someone asks a
Maybe.
breakdown of an indie comic, it's like, here, let me plagiarize Storied Arcs.
Would that be a compliment to us?
It would. No, I
It
would
would
take
be.
it.
It would be. It would be.
I don't
It
think
would
we
be.
use the word delve enough.
Yeah.
Are you familiar with that?
No,
Uh,
no.
oh yeah,
Look
so
that
they've
up.
they figured out how many like academic papers are being written by ChatGPT because ChatGPT has favorite words
Of
that have
course it does.
started to reemerge,
Of course it does. Oh.
and delve is one of them. And
Mm.
so if you look at like the Google, Google has like you can enter a word and it will show you the timeline of usage
Of course.
the
Yeah. Yeah.
last few hundred years,
Yeah.
and delve has spiked in the last 2 years, like exponentially. And people are getting caught with like PhD dissertations and
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
academic
Yeah.
research and
Yeah.
journal
Yeah.
articles. It's not just high school students,
Well,
which
yes.
you
Yeah.
would expect. And and undergrads in high school, that's kind of what you assume. But
Mhm.
it's like, oh snap, yeah, everybody's doing this. And
Mhm.
um yeah, and I was talking to someone who was like, yeah, I use it for like editing my work emails. I'll enter my draft into ChatGPT and ask it to like adjust the tone or convey something that I think I've missed. And I'm like, well, I mean, that's what I use my wife for. I'm like, it's one of those things where like I cannot tell you how many times we're sitting on the couch and we hand each other our phone. Cause like, could you read this before I send it?
Yeah.
And it's like,
Well,
yeah.
yeah. That.
So
Well, as I say, that's what my coworkers are for. I mean, the number of times I'll get something and someone will just send you an email and be like, "Can you read this? This is going out to a client or whatnot. Just read through it. A, make sure it makes sense. B, make sure there are no landmines or whatever it is." That's just what editors and other people are for.
exactly. Yeah.
Yeah.
So, that's at least one essential component of humanity that's been replaced already.
Yeah.
Um, but uh, so anyway, ChatGPT is it's chipping away at us. But we'll delve into that some other time.
Yeah. If we, I mean
Yeah, I said
that's the.
delve so that
Yeah.
it's more
Yeah.
comfortable with us.
Yeah. Yeah. We this is a deep delve into comics. We have delved deep.
We change our
We we
tagline to that.
we could we,
It
we
will
can
sound like
yeah.
our whole podcast is scripted by which anyone who listens for more than 5 minutes should know we don't have a script.
Yeah, yeah,
We've got
yeah,
a
yeah,
book, and this is a book club.
yeah,
And I think you're the weird one if you bring like an outline to a book club. Like we both take notes as we read,
yeah, yeah, yeah,
but
yeah.
it's definitely not scripted.
Yeah, yeah. This is the outlines are for class. You know,
Yeah,
like maybe for leading discussion and say let's hit these points here. But yeah, we go where the discussion takes us here. So, and naturally, a book like this is going to take us to the realm of the AI that we deal with now, or at least what we're calling AI now. Which I do think is interesting, right? I think it's something we've talked about. I think maybe both in Not All Robots and in Descender, the idea of what AI means to us now versus what we always thought AI was. Like when we think of AI in popular culture, it is always Matrix, Blade Runner, iRobot. It's that sort of thing. Now it's like AI is Chat GPT or AI is like really bad art.
well, and I think in a lot of those things, AI is a prop, and it's
Oh, Know Your
basically.
Station as well. That's the most recent we talked about as
Oh
well.
yes, yeah, yeah, yeah,
Know Your
and
Station.
that's
Yeah,
about
yeah,
art. Yeah.
yeah, yeah.
But in the ones that come before ChatGPT, it's a prop, much like if you think Jurassic Park is about dinosaurs, you really miss the point. It's about scientists
Yeah,
and where the line is
yeah,
between kind of your reckless idealism and your morality, and where
yeah.
you're so busy asking could we, you didn't ask should we.
Yes, yeah.
And most of these AI stories are basically kicking that can around. Especially your Terminator.
Mhm.
People were uh so like if you promise right now Skynet, I can guarantee at least one political party would latch onto that very firmly and the other would be opposed. I
Yeah.
actually couldn't tell you which would do which, but
No.
one of them would move first and the other one would be opposed to it.
It'd be reactionary.
But if
Yeah.
it was like, this would give us the strongest military defense in the world,
Yeah.
it will shoot down missiles before they even launch, yada, 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 which I remember when I was in high school, they were talking about some laser detection system that would shoot, incoming missiles down.
Yeah. That
Uh,
was
but
that was that was Reagan Space Wars, like a Star Wars program.
I remember it in the Bush era where they were
Well,
like,
I
they
think
had
it
a
was,
price
yeah.
tag on it.
Yeah.
And now going back and watching, the West Wing from that era, Leo was hawkish about that.
Yes.
And
Yeah.
Bartlett just made fun of it because it didn't work.
It didn't have,
It was
yeah,
like
never,
170 miles off or something.
yeah. Yeah.
And
Yeah.
it was
Exactly.
like,
Yeah. Yeah.
it's like,
It never worked. That kind of
it's
missile
like,
detection.
right. It's like if we spend another 100 billion, it might only be 160 miles off.
Yeah.
Uh, but yeah, it's those stories, Terminator, Matrix, a lot of those things aren't actually about AI. AI is a plot mechanic
Yeah.
to talk about human nature and scientists, whereas like AI has now started to be an actual character with its own kind of personality, agency, and force in stories, especially Know Your Station.
Yeah.
Um, and it was really interesting hearing Sarah's take on that, because their take on that was that the AI had like a clean slate and was not going to impose some kind of hierarchical rule on people,
Yes.
which was my read on it. And I was like, well, the people are deeply ingrained with, there must be some kind of hierarchical rule. The people program the AI. The people are ready to fall in line with the AI. I think the AI will pick up on this pretty quickly. I was like, am I more cynical than the cynic?
Well, but that is how popular culture has trained us to think about AI, because it's always, so many of those stories they're always about rebelling against your maker.
Right.
The Matrix is like that. Battlestar Galactica is like that. This idea of they made us, they programmed us, they made us in their image, right? So we have their flaws, thus we end up destroying them. It's that sort of thing that they can't.
Which is
help.
really a long way of saying we destroyed ourselves.
1,000%.
Yeah.
But it's why when you read something like Know Your Station, you think of, oh yes, it all seems utopic now until
Chapter
it
2.
decides,
Right?
until
Yeah.
it decides it doesn't want that anymore, and until it decides it's still somehow subservient, it's still doing the bidding. But yeah, that is a very cynical read of it. But like I said, it's the way that we've been trained through our popular culture experience, through AI, through all the stories we have of AI, always lead to the same sort of end or have the same kind of instigating moment. So I'm not saying you're wrong in your cynicism there, and at the time, but it's not unfounded. It doesn't come from being naturally cynical like you are. I think this one specifically is informed by all the other stories we have about robots and androids and AI and all that.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, all that to say, I think the AI discussion is obviously going to continue as we go through the book.
Yeah.
As far as issues 1 through 5 go, that's everything I have to say about it, because I'm already bursting at the seams to talk about 6 through 10.
Yeah, because I do think inherently, and not a spoiler, but I think the story is much more interesting on the back 2/3 here, because again, now we have two characters. The book is called Alex and Ada, and we only had one character for the first 4.5 issues. So
Yeah.
so
By the way, I'm assuming this is just like a typesetting choice, but I've noticed that they're very explicit. They never type Alex Ada or Alex ampersand Ada. It's always Alex plus Ada.
yeah, and I
Is there anything reading into that?
I don't think so. I don't know.
I think it just looks cleaner that way.
I think it is. I think it's a design choice. Alex Luna, amongst all the things he did, he's also the designer, which means he designed the logo and all that, and everything on the covers and all the layouts. So, I'm sure it was just a choice. I think of a book like The Wicked and the Divine is the same way. It's the Wicked plus sign the Divine. It is Sometimes it's Batman and Robin, A and D. Sometimes it's Batman ampersand Robin. Um, you know, I think it's just, I think it's just a stylistic choice. I don't think anything's meant to be read into that. I think they just probably thought it looked cooler.
Well, I think they're right. Yeah,
Yeah.
it works. But I just noticed, like, I was searching for this on a website, and the website search didn't respond to me using an ampersand.
Yeah.
And I was
Yeah.
like, come on, you gotta be smarter than that.
Well,
But
that is true. That's the website's fault there. But think about it, though. I don't know. It would look somehow weirder at this point if it were Alex ampersand Ada.
yes,
Like that would look strange to me. Um, the same way that Batman plus sign Robin would look strange to me.
yeah, I think that's, I think
Yeah.
that's fair.
Yeah. But I don't think you're meant. Listen, I don't think you're meant to read anything into it. Doesn't mean we can't, delve into it in the next couple episodes if we want to. But I don't think you're meant to delve and read anything into it. I think you're meant to just.
Yeah.
I wasn't even thinking about that. I think it's just meant to look cooler. It's cleaner.
So I was thinking the only time we use plus signs is a math equation. So it's like if they complete each other, the two of them added together.
And maybe if you asked Jonathan Luna and Sarah Vaughn now, that's what they would say. If you asked him when he designed it back in 2012, 2013, or whatever it was, I'm going to guess maybe the answer was he thought it looked cooler.
Yeah.
Made it distinctive. So yeah, maybe that's we kind of retcon meaning back into it. But I do think it looks cleaner. I think that's the word on those covers, having the plus sign there.
Yeah. Cool. Anything else for issues 1 through 5?
No, I'm at the end of my notes.
Then I think we're ready to move into next week. So as always, thank you for listening. Please like, share with a friend. If you, just throwing this out there, if you update your reading list on Goodreads or the Storygraph or Fable, just mention that you're reading along with the Storied Arcs podcast, and maybe someone will get curious. Also, if you are reading on Fable, I just opened a book club in Fable that I will try to keep in sync with what we're reading. And basically the gist is you can post questions and discuss with other readers. If I see activity going on there, I'm certainly willing to pull any of that into the podcast. And then finally, one last announcement, which will age really, really well in this episode. But as this comes out, Google Podcasts is being phased out and migrated into YouTube. So for anyone who happened to be listening on Google Podcasts, which there are a few in our stats, you will now go to youtube.com/@StoriedArcs, and you will find our entire collection there, which I think was actually going to be great visibility for us. It's just that it's an audio-only medium on YouTube. I think it's dumb that they folded their music player into their video player, but they didn't ask me for my input, nor will they be asking me for my feedback. So Google does what they please, and we roll with the punches. Anyway, thank you for listening, and we will see you next week for Volume 2, Issues 6 through 10.
Peace.